My first lecture today will be why was there a constitutional convention? First, I'll talk about a little bit about the traditional explanation for why there's a constitution. Second, I will talk about the process of calling the Constitutional Convention. And third, I will delve a little bit deeper into sort of this psychological crisis that many of the founding fathers, many of the people who were at the Constitutional Convention had, that really sort of compelled them to go to this convention and create the Constitution of the United States. So first, let's turn to the more traditional answer. Why was there a Constitutional Convention? And the answer we all know, because we needed it, right? Every high school textbook will tell you, of course, the Articles of Confederation were inadequate. We had a weak government. We needed a strong government. It's an assumption, and I underline that word, it's an assumption that's just sort of built into the way we look at our Constitution. It's an assumption that sort of says, one, the state governments had too much power. Two, there was no executive. Three, foreign countries did not respect us. Four, we were in the midst of an economic, upheaval. Five, we had unrest in the West. And six, we had trouble with the Native Americans. Let me just briefly touch on each of these for a second. Poke holes a little bit. Each of these arguments have a certain legitimacy. We can point to very, very specific items and say, yes, obviously there was no executive, or yes, obviously this national government was a weak form of government. But we also need to look at the context of things a little bit. And the context would suggest, one, I may not do them in the order because I'm going from my memory here, but let's deal with the issue of the states had too much power. The name of the United States of America is the United States, plural. The idea behind the revolutionary movement was that there were these independent states which joined in the Articles of Confederation almost as an alliance to gain independence. The intention of the revolutionaries was to create state governments who would be confederated with one another. So if there was, yes, the state governments maybe had too much power, but that was a part of the revolutionary movement. Second, the executive. There was no real executive. Well, there wasn't really an executive under the Articles of Confederation, and there was a good reason for that. The Articles of Confederation were written at the same time that the Declaration of Independence was written, and if you read the Declaration of Independence, it says, "King, you stink. You usurp power. You are an executive, and executives, use too much power. So we're going to create a government with kind of a minimum executive kind of sense of power." So we can talk about the economic upheaval, and yes, there was economic upheaval, inflation. There was a post-war recession. But actually, many of those issues were being settled within the states. Many of the states had gotten control of their currency. And after almost every war, you have a post-war recession. That's why we call them post-war recessions. And what happens after a few years after a post-war recession? The economy begins to generate, and that was indeed happening by the end of the 1780s. Foreign powers did not respect the United States. Constitution is passed, and guess what? Foreign powers still did not respect the United States until at least the late 1810s, 1820s, 1830s. That problem does not go away just simply by creating this document. There was a very serious issue related to foreign affairs that was a sort of contradiction in the Articles. And that problem was that commerce, and almost all foreign affairs was about commerce, the power to regulate commerce had not been given to Congress, whereas the power to control foreign affairs was. That was a contradiction. unrest in the West? Was there something called Shays' Rebellion in the winter of 1786, 1787? Absolutely. But Shays' Rebellion was suppressed by the state of Massachusetts. Rebellions continue after the Constitution is passed. The Whiskey Rebellion, Freeze Rebellion. And actually, my first work was on riots and upheaval. I can point to dozens of other kinds of examples like that that occurred afterwards. It doesn't disappear. And we in the state of Oklahoma understand that the problem of the relationship between Anglo-Americans, European Americans, and Native Americans did not suddenly disappear in 1787. They continue. The problem with Native Americans, as far as the European Americans were concerned, remained, leading ultimately, of course, to the Trail of Tears and the settlement by Native Americans here in Oklahoma, but also continues for decades after that west of the Mississippi. So that each of these reasons, there's an element of truth to each of these reasons for having a stronger central government. But it's only an element of truth. There are all these other countervailing elements. That's the first point I wanted to make. Second point, let's talk about the process of calling the Constitutional Convention. And the first question we have to ask is, what is a convention? And a convention in 18th century parlance was a special representation of the people called together to discuss important issues. So during the Revolutionary War, when several of the states had to form their own state governments, they turned to this convention, this special representation of the people, to create their own state constitutions. Moreover, there were conventions among states, a number of conventions among states, to deal with very specific economic questions. During the Revolutionary War, in particular, there were several conventions, and the Continental Congress had asked the states to do this, to deal with trying to regulate prices during inflation. They did not do so very effectively. So the sense of having conventions to deal with problems within a state and beyond states was very much in place. And if we look at the process of leading towards the Constitutional Convention, we can see that in 1785, two states have a conference. We refer to this as the Mount Vernon Conference because it was held in Washington's home, Mount Vernon. This conference between the states of Maryland and Virginia had gotten together, and they more or less agreed to deal with commercial issues, particularly revolving around trade around the waterways that they shared, the waterways of the Chesapeake Bay, the Pocomoke River, and the Potomac River. And they agreed, okay, we can deal with this, and they came up with an agreement. Basically, we're not going to have any problems between the states in sort of this kind of trade. Based on that success, the Virginia legislature said, you know, this issue of commerce, we have this questions of commerce among many states. Let's issue a call to other states to have another meeting, we'll call it a convention, in Annapolis in 1786. And this leads to the calling of the Annapolis Convention. About, I think, 5 states actually end up sending representatives to the Annapolis Convention. They meet in Annapolis, and they sit around for a couple of days going, we're waiting for more guys to show up. And it was only guys, of course, right? We're waiting for more guys to show up. More guys don't show up, and they say, oh, we can't really do anything. But you know, the problems we confront in commerce are so significant. The problems we confront are so significant that we really need a larger convention, including all the states, to discuss this. Let us meet next May in Philadelphia and have this sort of convention to discuss what we can do to make the current Constitution, and they actually use the word, the current Constitution of the United States more effective. Now think about it for a second. Is there any legal basis for this call of convention? No. It's just a bunch of big shots, a bunch of old white men. Actually, they were relatively young white men, getting together and saying, let's rethink this. They send letters to the Congress, they send letters to the states, and Congress reluctantly says, yes, you can meet to discuss revisions of the Articles of Confederation. And states more or less agreed to the same sort of thing. This is the rationale of the process. But when those young to middle-aged, mainly, young white men, get together in Philadelphia, they do something entirely different. And the question becomes, why? What was it that was upsetting them? If we can sort of look at a kind of a balanced evaluation of what we might refer to as the traditional causes for the Constitutional Convention and say, yes, there were some problems. No, but they were not as big as perhaps people made out. And if we can actually look at the Articles of Confederation and say, well, if there were 3 things done to the Articles of Confederation, they would have been more effective and probably as effective as they needed for 1787. Those 3 things were, 1, give Congress the power to tax, which it did not have. It had the power to ask the states to raise money for them, but that's not very effective. 2, give Congress the power to regulate. Give Congress the power to regulate commerce. That would enable the United States to more effectively deal with making treaties concerning commerce with other nations. And 3, create something of an executive office. Not a powerful monarch-like figure who could oversee this whole process throughout the year. 3 things. The Constitution, of course, went way beyond that. But why did it go way beyond it? And if you want the answer to that question, I refer you to a specific document written by James Madison called Vices of the Political System. And in this document, James Madison listed many of the reasons that we just outlined about the states were too powerful, the government was ineffective, foreign countries did not respect us. He goes through these, but at the very tail end of this document, he makes a couple of points about the power of the states, using language which I find truly revealing of the kind of angst, the kind of anxiety, the kinds of concerns that were spinning in the heads of the Founding Fathers. He says, the states are creating laws which are too mutable. He refers to this as the mutability of laws. And of course, Madison was a smart guy. He had this wonderful vocabulary. Mutable, changeable. They seem to change every year. One year, the state legislature passes a law that helps debtors. The next year, a bunch of creditors get into power, and they pass laws favoring creditors. The laws are unclear. They keep shifting ground on us. Second thing, and again, this is his vocabulary. The laws are too malleable. Right? Malleable, look at my hands when I'm saying that. Malleable, like they can be molded this way and that way, right? And 3, the laws are unfair as a result. And this was his concern. And he said the problem, right, was that the right kinds of people were not getting elected. And of course, what is he thinking? Who are the right kinds of people? Right? He says, and he's very specific. He says, we need to create an electoral process that's going to extract, I love that word, extract the noble-minded, right? The people who have education, the people who have talent. A natural aristocracy. He doesn't use that phrase, but all the language he uses refers specifically to that. A natural aristocracy. We need to create an electoral process that's going to extract these people from the mass of society. And that's almost a direct quote. I'm going on my memory, so I never trust my memory on quotes. But that's almost a direct quote. And the problem is that too many of the people in the state governments were not interested about the general good. They were concerned about their own welfare. And the people who were voting them in were concerned about their own welfare. And this could lead to the potential, and this is a very important concept for Madison, which he elaborates on eventually in Federalist number 10, which can lead to a tyranny of the majority. But the minority he was thinking of weren't minorities as we understand them. The minority were the elite. And he wanted to protect that. So the true driving force behind the Constitutional Convention is this fear of the democratic impulse in the American Revolution. Thank you.
Freedom 101 is made possible by generous support from the University of Oklahoma Alumni Association. Freedom 101 is a program of the Institute for the American Constitutional Heritage at the University of Oklahoma. For more videos and podcasts, visit freedom.ou.edu.